Welcome to 12 Gauge Investigative.
In the shadows where the truth hides deep, echoes of the lost and the secrets they keep. Cold cases burn in the back of your mind. We dig through the dark, one clue at a time. This ain't fiction, this is blood, this is truth. 12 Gauge Investigative, justice uncaged. We ask the questions they're too scared to say, shining a light where the guilty pray. From killers to whispers, we won't look away.
Good morning, everybody. My name is 12 Gauge. Welcome to my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. I know it is 3:48 in the morning Central Time here where I'm at. I don't know what time it is where you might be watching this or listening to this, but I labeled it the Late Show with 12. And the reason I did that because I kind of was in a hurry earlier when I was going through what I was reading, and wanted to go back and talk a little bit about the continuance, because I went to the gym and I was thinking about this. There's something that many people do not seem to understand about the judicial process. And one thing that I've noticed is many people still have that optimism, which there's nothing wrong with that. They still have that optimism that the defense is going to bring it. The defense is going to fight. The defense is going to do everything they can to get this man off. And I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that at all. But it's kind of like the same song and dance that people have been saying since the very beginning. You know, they say, well, whenever this hearing comes about, you're going to really see the defense bring it, and they're going to show, that Brian is innocent. They're going to bring this specialist. They're going to bring this expert. This person's gonna vindicate Brian. And I'm still waiting for that to happen. Because if he is truly innocent, then there should be somebody that's able to step up and provide information to really do that. But up to this point, I have not seen it. Not really heard it. Not really seen the fight in the defense that many others see. And it's interesting to me that that people still have that much faith in the defense, especially with everything that they've been able to try to suppress, the motions in limine, all these things. Um, yeah, I can't sleep either for whatever reason. Good to see you here. Thank you. You know, because when you're thinking about this whole process, I was told one time that, you know, people have this kind of thinking, and I'm going to run it down for you so that it makes sense. It's kind of like when somebody gets arrested, they're going to say, well, it's okay, I'll be out on bail within an hour. They still stay in jail. It's okay, I'll get probation. They go to court, they get convicted. It's okay, I'll be out within 6 months. 5 years later, they're still in prison. It's okay, I'll get out and I'll regain my life and I'll be better and more successful. They get out, they're struggling, they can't find a job, they can't find a resident, they're fighting with their families because their family doesn't want them at their houses. It's okay. I'll be all right. I'll be able to bounce back from this. They get back on drugs or alcohol or to commit another crime. It's okay. I'll beat this. I'll be out on bail. And the whole process continues over and over and over. So, is that optimism or is that failure to see your position in life? Because that's what I see when I hear people talking about this case. Well, as soon as we have this person come up, he's going to vindicate Brian. As soon as we get to this next hearing, Brian's going to go free. As soon as this, as soon as that, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. At one particular point, you got to quit being in denial and you have to accept the fact that maybe this guy really did it. Maybe this guy really has enough evidence against him to show culpability. And it's not a bias, but it's a definitive measure of evidence that shows otherwise. And I know Bullets have seen this. She's in the chat right now, and I know that she knows she knows what I'm talking about as far as working with people that have that proverbial optimism but fail to understand the reality of the problem at hand, and that's not that you're not optimistic about being innocent or found innocent or possibly facing lesser charges, but yet it's about the pattern of inconsistency in your life, you know. Yeah, Paula, I can't sleep either, so I got on here to just do this live, you know. And you hear that all the time whenever you're talking with individuals that break the law, that are in the criminal justice system. You see that optimism. Well, my lawyer's going to get me off. My lawyer's going to get me probation. My lawyer's going to get me a lesser time. And when that doesn't happen, you know, at one particular point, you have to be realistic because that's all I've heard since day one. Brian's going to be vindicated because of this. Wait to this next hearing. He's going to be vindicated. The defense is going to bring it. The prosecution is going to do this. Well, it's not the defense's job to say a word. She could sit there and plead the fifth the rest of the time, and it's up to the prosecution to bring the burden of proof. I don't understand why there's so much issue with the defense bringing anything in this trial that's going to happen on August 18th, because it's the prosecution's job to bring the burden of proof. And the prosecution hasn't done anything to sabotage this case whatsoever, in my opinion, because you've hardly heard anything from them in these motion hearings that would be definitive, other than going against what the defense is talking about. Kind of like in these documents, you know? Yeah, that's so true. They can be optimistic and get their asses handed to them by not saying anything because of the evidence. He's going to be released to the state and own Idaho. Yeah, prosecution has been very professional in keeping the case's integrity. Exactly, but they get blamed the most. I heard today that it was the prosecution who was what did I how was it stated? The prosecution is the one that how was it stated? It was something the defense was filing motions for, but they blamed it on the prosecution, that they're the ones that wanted this to happen. Oh, they were saying that the prosecution wanted the continuance, not the defense, which is not even true. The defense is the one that wanted the continuance, and they were blaming the prosecution, stating that the prosecution's the one that wanted the continuance, which is interesting to me, how individuals try to twist this whole thing around and blame the prosecution. I would blame the prosecution too if I was criminally minded, because probably the prosecution in your own cases has led to convictions, you know? So, of course, you would have a bad taste in your mouth regarding the prosecution. It's interesting how people do not understand the judicial code, but still they're so confident that certain things are gonna happen, you know? Yes, those blaming the prosecution don't know how the system really works, and if they have experience being a defendant, they always blame the DA. It's like we're on the same wavelength right now, Bullets. It's kind of scary. you know, um, it's easy to blame the state. The state had the burden of proof to provide the evidence, the testimonies, to show the jury that more reason than not, the defendant committed the crime that they're being accused of. The defense doesn't have to say anything because, that's their right. And for somebody to have the right to not speak or you have anything used against them, they sure are speaking a lot. They sure are making a lot of claims that have not been in their favor, which I believe is a strategic move on the defense attorney's part. The more time you allot for your client to kind of get, you know, more time, that kind of shows that people will forget their testimonies. People will get older, they'll forget the facts. Um, you know, and that happens in trials, you know. You're hoping that maybe a witness will, I'm not, these girls are pretty young, but anything could happen. They could have a motor vehicle accident or something could happen to them health wise, and they wouldn't be able to testify against your client. The more time that you have, the more life happens. So you have that capability of your client being benefited this time that you're trying to gain. And reading these documents, I really didn't realize any of that until I started really diving into these documents and seeing exactly what the document said. Because this document right here is full of understanding exactly what the defense has been trying to do. It says, like this one right here, it says, defendant has not established a continuance is necessary to conduct a more thorough life history investigation and identify necessary experts. As we've heard, there's court cases that have been decided all the way up to the Supreme Court where it's not necessary for the defense to be able to go all the way through your life history from birth until current time. It's not necessary for you to have that kind of time in every situation, especially a death penalty case. So the defense has wanted that kind of time. They wanted that kind of time to be able to get this case in order, to be able to go through all the discovery. Well, they just did a 25th motion for discovery. Does that mean that they haven't gotten 25 times the discovery that they need? Or no, they have all the discovery. Most of the time when they're doing those motions is to buy themselves some time to say, well, I'm still looking at discovery because I wanted to have it on paper. Because if it didn't, if in everything you do in the legal realm, if it's not on paper, it didn't happen. So when you're asking for these motions, you're merely just putting it down on the record saying, well, we need this much time to go over this discovery because if indeed the individual does get found guilty in the appeals process, you can say, well, we wanted 25 times the discovery and it was either granted or it was not. And they're just merely preparing for the future. As you've heard, many of these hearings that the defense has been talking about the penalty phase, the penalty phase, the penalty phase, trying to get the death penalty off the books. And why do you think that's happened? People have not talked about that one bit. Even when being accused of misconduct, Jennings remained cool, and with the accusation, Hitler was not so cool about it and really wants to buy more time to work on mitigating factors for sentencing to save his life. She knows they will lose trial just trying to save his life. And I get that. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with trying to save her defendant's life because that's her job. Where I have an issue with it is, what about the families? They are owed the same amount of time to get justice for their loved ones that were murdered. You get what I'm saying? You just can't have it one-sided when it comes to a trial. It's the state which is representing the families, which always get lost, you know, always get lost in the process. Not that they should have any more kind of leniency than the defendant, but they always get lost in the process. I've been in court so many times when a public defender or private defender's defenses loses their crap and they always spin it on those investigating the case. And we've heard that time and time again, have we not? There was issues in the investigation of the case. But to be real, the defense has their own investigators. So how can you say that the prosecution messed up the case by their faulty investigation when you have your own investigators investigating the same case? Did they mess up your side of the case as well if they found the same type of information? How is that possible that two different types of investigators come to the same conclusion, but you just focus on the state and their ability to corrupt an investigation? It does it happen? Of course it does. Nothing in the judicial process is 100%. And that's why it's so easy to go against the prosecution because you can plant that seed of reasonable doubt. And here's a good question or statement. Don't you know the PD investigators never do anything wrong? No, I don't know that, but you know, everybody has that ability to have that fallacy, you know, that ability to make a mistake, but yet it's never done so much as in to try to pigeonhole a defendant. People have that mentality where they think that once somebody's in custody, that people just ramp up and want to find any information against them to be guilty. Well, that's partially true. You're trying to win your case, but nothing is fabricated most of the time. Most of the time, it's scientific data that can't be manipulated, you know? Hey, bad actors, thank you for being here. I'm going to read a little bit more of this. It says, defendant next argues he needs additional time to investigate and prepare mitigation evidence, which he contends is necessary to uphold his constitutional rights, particularly those under the Eighth and Sixth Amendment. Specifically, the defense team claims that to be effective, the counsel must conduct an exhaustive and comprehensive dive into the defendant's life history for additional mitigation evidence, analyze the information into a cohesive narrative for the jury, and identify any additional behavioral, cultural, scientific, and or mental health experts that may be necessary to develop the mitigation presentation. Well, to be fair, that is that is needed. To be fair, it is needed. Everybody should have that opportunity. But the dude was 28 years old. How much time do you need to dive into a 28-year-old person's life history? How far back are you going? I remember early on, she stated in a hearing while they were still in Latah County, where she stated they might have to go back 4 generations. Why that far back? I understand it's a death penalty case, but after a while, you see the history of mental illness in the family. It should go back 2 generations. You know, if there's any kind of um, any kind of behaviors that are present that are passed on from one generation to the next, you should be able to spot those quite quickly. You know, if grandpa had mental health, if grandma had mental health, well, what about their parents? Which one of their parents did they get that from? Maybe one of their parents had it, and then their parents, or maybe it skipped a generation. I mean, it's not that difficult to do a family tree, and especially when you're trying to get your client to form a baseline and a threshold. You know, you do assessments, you do screenings, you do kind of psychological assessments where it's easy to find the pattern. It really is, because on those, if those experts really did those assessments correctly, then you're able to do a family breakdown and you ask all these questions while the person's sitting in front of you. If they don't know the answer, then you go and investigate the nuclear family. I mean, he has two sisters. Obviously, you're going to be able to see if there's a pattern of mental health in that, if there's a pattern of inconsistent behavior that causes social, societal norms that are to be challenged one way or the other. I mean, they became clinicians themselves for a reason. What was what was the reason? Is there some kind of um, issues in the family that caused them to want to find answers for themselves, or were they just generally interested in the field? So, I mean, I'm sure she could have found that out in 6 months easily. But did she really make it a priority, or was she waiting to buy time? Right. I agree with you. And that's funny. In utero. Let's see what we can find in utero to dictate whether he had fetal alcohol syndrome or anything else. What's the other one that mini Down syndrome or anything like that? I mean, it's interesting that we already know that he's been diagnosed with OCD, ADHD, and the autism. Okay, so we know that those three things have been identified. So, how did that form a maladaptive functioning of life for this individual? How did that happen? What areas can you present to the court or get the prosecution, if you're going to use that angle, that presented almost a handicap in life that would have presented him to be either not culpable of committing these crimes, or I believe if they're going to go that avenue, then they're going to use that as a reasoning for commission of the crimes if they're unable to have any other areas that that the prosecution might bring up. You know, kind of like I heard a defense attorney talking, and he said, "Well, he might say, yeah, that's my knife, but somebody stole it." Okay, how can you prove that though? Why didn't you report that? Did you talk to anybody at all about that knife being stolen? And if that knife was being stolen, and then you see how they're painting the picture, well, he was on Amazon to try to replace the knife that was stolen. That's what he was doing. That's the reasonable doubt right there, right? But there's so much that goes along with that. Like, if they're able to honestly plant the seed where he was surveying the girls or where he was surveying the house, if they can make the ping stick, if they can make, the car, the camera images, all this stuff stick, then, then the prosecution is going to do what it needs to do to prove its case against this individual. And is that wrong? Everybody acts like criminal courts all across the US every day don't have this burden. They act like this is the only case where they have this burden. No, there's criminal trials going on every day all over the U.S. Where the prosecution has that burden of proof to prove that they have the right person in custody. And I've always said this too, Bullets. I've always said that. So handicapped he was getting a PhD in criminal justice. They can't prove he doesn't know right from wrong. Is that the basis for his entire master's and doctorate? Exactly. Which I don't understand people's fascination with this suspect, whether it's feeling sorry for him or just being contrarian, or they actually believe that he wouldn't be capable of doing this based on the evidence that they have and their understanding of it. Which it doesn't matter. Everybody's going to have their opinion. Many people thought OJ was guilty. I thought he was guilty. And look, he came and pulled a wild one. The glove didn't fit, so that was enough for the jury to say, well, you know what? He can't possibly be the one if those gloves don't fit. Casey Anthony's another one, and I've mentioned that case more than once. Casey Anthony to me was guilty as sin, you know. Hey Alexi, nice to see you. Well, we've seen where the alternative suspects were kind of denied based on their presentation of it, based on speculation, not on evidence. So, I mean, I could make you a suspect in this murder, and I could make a whole narrative about how you would have been capable of killing these people and you had motive and this and that and the other, but without conducive evidence to put you at the crime scene, to put you at the opportunity to commit these crimes, and to have the ability to commit these crimes, that's when it becomes crucial, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Um, and I know you and I have had conversations about this, especially the early morning. You know, we all have I mean, any of us in these chats have the ability to commit a crime, but if those things are not met, then you can't ultimately say, well, this person has more chance of committing this crime because to be honest, there for a while I thought the frats could have been involved. I thought the Davids could have been involved, and they were obviously alternative suspects or alternative perpetrators in this investigation, and they were found out not culpable, meaning their DNA didn't match. Did they have the culpability to go into that house and commit these murders? Of course. But in this paperwork, it states later down or in the next document about how they deep dove into the alternative perpetrator and how they defined that they would not be able to be, that wouldn't hold up in court. Okay, let me continue on. It says, despite having hired a mitigation team 2 years ago, the defense counsel contend that recently discovered redacted have raised red flag that the defendant may have, blah, 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 blah. According to the defendant's primary mitigation investigation attorney, blah, 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 her team of 4 have been diligent in their investigation into the defendant's life history, but there have been redaction. She believes that with time she will be able to overcome these barriers by this ex parte deal case history. The defendant has not demonstrated a continuance to accommodate further investigation is constitutionally required. The Eighth Amendment required that a capital defendant be allowed to present all relevant evidence in mitigation, State versus Payne, and some other case history. Jury must be allowed to consider all of the capital defendant's mitigating character evidence. In addition, a capital defendant has a Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial and the effective assistance of counsel in both the guilt and penalty phases of capital case. And we've heard that from time and time again. We want a fair trial. We want a fair trial. What are they doing? They're putting your That's weird. They're putting your they're not putting the name, they're putting what you go under as far as your email. That's weird. I just noticed that. Um so those of you that are in chat right now, and if you watch this on replay, do you really believe that he hasn't had the ability to a fair trial? I mean, honestly, the argument has been that he will not be able to get a fair trial because of all the media coverage and the publicity and all this other stuff that's going on. This man is no more famous than Sean P. Diddy Combs, and they sat a jury for his trial, which is currently going on right now. So I believe that they're going to be able to seat a jury. It's going to suffice. And if any kind of other leaked information happens, the jury will be sequestered. You know, I believe that. Um, I don't believe that the defense has anything up their sleeve that they're going to bring their A game and they're going to try to destroy this and they're going to try to destroy that because that's not their job to destroy the prosecution. That's a YouTube narrative. You must destroy the prosecution's case in order to be found not guilty. That's not true. You just have to plant reasonable doubt in the jury's minds to win the case. That's it. And then there's the penalty phase. You know, if he's innocent, he's innocent. If he's guilty, then we go to the penalty phase. You know, this man has been given a lot of time. His attorneys have been given a lot of time. Yeah, while she was in Latah County, what was she doing all during that time? She wasn't obviously working on the case. She would go to every other one of those hearings and ask for specifics, which there's nothing wrong with that. She's done her job, honestly. She really has. But it's time to get to trial. You can't stall forever. You know what I mean? She has done her job. Yeah, I bet they are regretting that. They're regretting probably getting a new judge because remember, it was all about if we keep it in Latah County, they're going to burn the courthouse down. They're going to picket. They're going to, go after people, this and that and the other. We can't get a fair trial. Well, how much more fair do you want it? Fair does not mean where it's only your side and your side only. That's entitlement. She did. She had judge eating out of her hand. She did. I believe that the trial would probably still be not even to the suppression hearings over there in Latah. I mean, you want to talk about the miscarriage of justice? That was a miscarriage of justice over there based on the families not being able to get anywhere near closure. They weren't given any opportunity to read any of the documents that have been dropping, that have been unsealed. They weren't able to do a lot of things, and their loved ones were murdered. Let's take YouTube out of it. We're not entitled to any information. So when people stand up here and say, "Well, we need to hear this and we need to hear that," we're the public. We understand that the public has that right, but at the same time, we're not entitled to anything more than what has been given up to this point. You know, I believe what her downfall was because she seemed to be bringing a pretty strong game until she took on the second death penalty case. And I believe that was her downfall. I believe that's where she started really not having the opportunity to present a trial argument for her client. And people have wondered whether he will fire her and whether we will start all over. I don't believe so. I believe he's going to stick with her because what other option does he have at this point? And people don't understand. They're still talking about the potential mistrial. Well, we haven't even gone to trial. How is it going to be a mistrial if we haven't even gone to trial? A defendant points out the defense counsel is constitutionally required to conduct a thorough investigation in preparation for the penalty phase of a capital case. Presentation of some mitigating evidence, even if strong, is insufficient if other mitigating evidence is available upon reasonable investigation. The assertion that counsel needs the continuance to conduct an exhaustive and comprehensive dive into the defendant's life history for additional mitigation evidence overstates the extent of his counsel's constitutional obligation. That means that constitutionally she's not obligated to deep dive that far, whether it's a death penalty case or not, based on the case law and the Supreme Court rulings. Counsel's investigation into mitigation evidence must be reasonable. And I believe, for whatever it's worth, take that with a quarter and a cup of coffee, that she has reasonably gone above and beyond, even though she states there hasn't been enough time, but how much more time you need? They do keep changing. That's weird. The name game is crazy tonight. So weird. Glad we don't have 20 people in here or not be following our peeps that well. Yeah. Does mine say 12 gauge or does mine say the other? Let me see. Oh, mine said the same thing as y'all's. Um, so constitutionally, she's not obligated to go that deep. The defense teams in death penalty cases urge counsel in death penalty cases to conduct an ongoing, exhaustive, and independent investigation of every aspect of the client's character, history, records, and any circumstances of the offense. To meet their constitutional obligation, courts look not to what is prudent or appropriate, but only what is constitutionally compelled. So that's where many people in the YouTube world have no understanding because that they're looking at it as an emotional connection rather than what is constitutionally compelled and appropriate for this defendant. You get what I'm saying? So I did hear an attorney talk about possible options that were terrifying. Sounded like he done it before. Can read yours, talk like they're the Oracle of Delphi priestess. Strange. I don't know enough about that case to really have an opinion or a statement about it, one way or the other. Roe, a capital case, and this is not Roe versus Wade. This is another case. Is instructive here. One post conviction, Roe argued her counsel was deficient because they failed to perform an adequate investigation into Roe's background in search of mitigating evidence. Specifically, Roe argued counsel should have been investigated her life from birth to the sentencing hearing. The counsel were deficient in presenting her mental health workup. And I believe that um, that's one of the reasons why Ann Taylor has taken so long for all the slack that she does get. One of the reasons she's taken so long is because if it does go to the appellate court, she doesn't want to be the reason why he gets vindicated of the charges, if that makes sense. She doesn't want the ineffective of counsel to be a reason why this man is set free on a technical violation. And that's why she's pushing for all this stuff to happen. And one thing that people seem to not understand, no, with the delay that was not granted, he said she could quit. There wouldn't be time for another lead to catch up, so the delay would have to be granted. So one thing that people fail to understand as well, if the public defender works for the state, Bill Thompson is her boss, so to speak. So her job is to do what she needs to do to defend this client. But at the end, she works for the state. She's not her own entity. So you're going to go hard against the state, but there's so much that you can do when you work for this agency. You get what I'm saying? I don't know. Do y'all want me to take the beta off the stage so people don't see y'all's names? I mean, let's see if that changes anything. You know, people forget that Ann Taylor works for the state. She isn't her own entity, so it's not the defense versus the prosecution. Um, and I believe that she has gone above and beyond to try to represent her client. With whether she's done the best job, that's neither here nor there. If she's, you know, able to prove that she's gone to great lengths to investigate and present mitigating evidence, then she's done her job. This defendant should not get any special treatment than anybody else would have gotten before him. I think people mentioned Lori Vallow, even though she tried to defend herself. Um, you know, I believe that in the Lori Vallow case, had she had a public defender, she may have been granted a lot more things than trying to defend herself. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that, Alexi. She is his mouthpiece, and If he's trying to defend himself, then exactly what you're saying is he's not doing a very good job. So these are some of the things that are guidelines, ABA guidelines cited by the defendant. It includes, but is not limited to, defendant's kindergarten to PhD education records, including coursework, interviews and correspondence, defendant's mental health and medical records, which, you know what, up until when he went to rehab, they're going to do a comprehensive on his life history. So you can get that in one place. So for if he went to rehab at 15, 15 years of his life is already going to be comprehensively in that assessment, psychological workup, all that. So it's going to be done for you. You just got to get those documents. So that only allots 13 years after that. Records related to childhood car accident, defendant's employment records, mental health, education, employment records of defendant's sisters, which I don't see what that has anything to do with the defendant. Mental health records of defendant's parents, father's military records, social security records, court records from multiple generations of Koberger family, paternal side, VA records and death certificates from maternal and paternal uncles, multiple interviews with defendant and each immediate family member, interview of the two defendants' fourth grade teachers, former boxing coach, and a psychologist who evaluated defendant in 2005. So, what happened in fourth grade that you would need two of his fourth grade teachers to give testimony? That's fine. So, that's interesting right there. Interviews with multiple members of defendant's extended family on maternal and paternal side. Interviews with defendant's professor and advisor on DeSales University. Interviews on defendant's former coworkers. Interviews of at least one family friend. Letters and jail calls between defendant and his family. It is evident from the reports of defendant's mitigation experts, Dr. Orr, Dr. Ryan, and Dr. Brahms, that they have developed an expansive understanding of the defendant's family. So they've already done that workup. Environment, social, developmental history, family history, both nuclear and extended over multiple generations, educational history and mental health and medical history. From this evidence, these experts have rendered several current diagnoses and identified other diagnoses for which defendant met criteria in some point of his life. So, despite such an extensive investigation, the defendant claims additional investigation is warranted to identify blank, 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 blank. However, defendant had not established such investigation is constitutionally compelled, particularly given the extensive work already completed. Rather, the claim need is based on an unqualified speculation by blah, 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 blah. Defendant has not offered any declaration by any of his disclosed mitigation experts opining the same, nor has he pointed to anything in their expert report that would support speculation. And people have problems with that word, I guess, because at one point in an interview with the father, he said speculation is just another name for lying. So yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, coach um, from 2005. That's funny. Gray can see you in the bushes. Makes no sense they're getting death records of the extended family. I've not heard anything from his early childhood that sticks out to me that could be that impactful. They're saying that he was in a car wreck, and depending on what kind of evidence is brought out in that car wreck, could determine any kind of either brain injury, skull injury, frontal lobe injury, occipital lobe injury, anything like that. But if it was merely just something that would just, nothing that major, because there's different types of car accidents. Just because you put car accident does not mean that he flipped the vehicle 16 times and, barely escaped with his life. At least I hope not. But think about if there's any frontal lobe damage, that is the impulse control center. How him boxing could have caused that. If he boxed to the extent that he actually had a semi-professional fight, or did he get any kind of major damage done to him? Was he that good of a boxer? Was he not? Did they use headgear? Did they not use headgear? Did he get any injuries that required surgeries? Any kind of MRI that were done based on him being knocked out? Anything like that, is going to go into these comprehensive documents. So to have all this stuff presented in the trial is going to be important, but it's not gonna do that much good when it comes to the propensity of him being able to commit these crimes, because it's all about opportunity, urge, and application. Do you guys think he had inner monster born in him, or did he have something happen? I just get a feeling it was always with him somehow. He obviously lived. I know someone that just had lost her 18-year-old stepdaughter to an accident last Monday. I'm sorry to hear that. Car wreck would give you just some brain injury or PTSD, but not the defiance murder people. Very true. We're on the same brain link right now. Bullets. Have we seen any neurology witnesses? No, we haven't. The bullying did it. The cruelty. I would believe that that would have been a form of the catalyst, but many people get bullied and they don't go out and kill people. If anything, it makes them more introverted, you know? I believe that this was a perfect storm with everything that happened to him in his life. He was preparing for this for whatever reason. Maybe not the 1122 hours, but he was preparing for this to eventually happen somewhere, somehow. Instead, it was an invitation for a perpetual continuance. More importantly, aside from the blank, all this information has been available and documented in the record for months. Yet again, that defendant is only now moving on with a continuance for further investigation into blank unsupported suspicion smacks of tactical gamemanship and delay. Absent more compelling evidence that blank planned for blank. Uncovering a reasonable timeline to do so, there is no constitutional basis for further investigation, particularly on an open ended basis with no plan to bring the matter home. So there's no real basis, um, kind of like what this says. In sum, the defendant has not demonstrated that a continuance nor further investigation into potential mitigation evidence is necessary to uphold his constitutional right. The right to present mitigation evidence and the right to effective assistance of counsel do not necessitate an investigation of its entire history. They simply require that the investigation be reasonable. While easily available mitigation evidence cannot be ignored, defendants' briefing demonstrates that the evidence that are attempted to obtain is far from an easily available and in fact may not even exist. Further, the evidence prompting the need for further investigation has been available for months, yet it is only now that the defendant seeks a continuance. The tactic seems geared toward achieving delay rather than in good faith effort to obtain meaningful mitigation evidence. So, I'm going to quit reading right there. Whatever your belief is about this document, about the individual that's on trial in August, you know, the fact of the matter is eventually you run out of time. Time is not your friend. You know what I mean? Time is not your friend. Eventually you run out of it. And you must go face the music. You must go face a jury and let them decide your fate. Your attorney is going to be able to present all that they're able to present. That's why there's appeals processes. That's why you have the ability to appeal these things all the way up to the Supreme Court. He'll still be incarcerated while he's appealing it, but he'll be alive. You know what I mean? So, isn't it ironic that his mom wrote that? She wrote against Bundy's death penalty. Yes, it is. You know, I heard something today that was, or yesterday, that was monumental to me that I've known, and everybody knows that. We all have a history. If any of us were to be suspected of any kind of heinous act such as this, our history would be brought out almost immediately. That would be the first thing that they would deep dive into. They wouldn't wait to develop a profile on any of us. It would be almost automatic because you have to develop that psychological history to not only prove that you're competent enough to stand trial, that you understand the charges that are brought against you. So this almost happens instantly. From the moment that you're arrested, this psychological buildup is going on because they want to know that you're competent enough to stand trial and understand the charges that are brought against you. If not, then we wouldn't get to this point. If he wouldn't have been competent enough to stand trial or have an understanding of the charges brought against them, you remember when they were, you remember whenever they were, what was that judge's name? Was it Marshall? Where he was first read the charges against them once he got to Idaho. And she asked him, do you understand the charges that are being brought against you? And he said, yes. He said, yes, he understood. She said, these are the charges, and this is what you could be facing. Do you have any lack of understanding? And he said, no. So he was capable, he's capable of understanding what's brought against them. So that psychological buildup started from the very beginning because you gotta really find out what you're dealing with in this defendant that you're trying to defend. Why would you wait this long to have a psychological buildup? Like I said, surely this individual does not have that much stuff in his background that you need more time. And I'm glad that they didn't grant a continuance because I've known people whose psychological has been in volumes and they still were competent enough to go to trial based on their charges. Yeah, it does. It starts from booking. So for people to think that, there's a sequence to these things, well, there is. but it starts at the very beginning. It's a working process to try to understand this individual in which you're suspecting of certain things, which you're arresting on certain things. You shouldn't have to wait until right before trial for this to happen. Yeah, I was moved to the 18th. So I believe that they have a very comprehensive, expanded, extensive psychological buildup on this man at this point. And if they don't, then the defense has failed him. But that does not have anything to do with his constitutional rights. If his attorney is not working hard for him, as many people believe that she is, I believe the last two hearings she hasn't really done anything but go through the motions. She has an understanding that it's going to trial and that it needs to be concluded because there's been enough time. There's not anything else that she can do at this point to keep it from getting the trial in front of the jury. I never thought of it like that. Bad. I do know that a mother's instinct is just within you, and you can be in tune with your kids and their being. I feel sure. I never know what she has felt from him. Yeah, I can't believe you are all up at this time of night. You know, that car wreck is going to be a catalyst, I'm sure. His drug use is going to be a catalyst, but depending on what psychological workup that they had once he was released, surely he was under doctor's care, so the doctor's notes and progression or regression is going to be in those documents. All this stuff is already been done. From whatever age he went to rehab. I think it was 15. I could be wrong. But they do psychologicals on you. They do screenings to diagnose you. I do those. You do a life history on people and 12 core functions of it. And it's to dig deep into who you're working with, what you're working with, and what disadvantages this person has regarding life and maladaptive functioning with societal norms. With the car wreck, him involved, or the car wreck that lost three friends in. I don't know. That's going to be interesting to find out. Yes, that one was before him, but she has written other things regarding her son, and they just seem him troubled. And his father was worried about him as well, trying to hook him up with friends. I mean, the parents know what kind of issues he struggled with. And I'm sure extensively they've been asked about these things, and they probably, have been able to give some kind of breakdown as to what areas Brian really struggles in. What the hell was that? There's all kinds of random noises happening. They say this is the witching hour from 3 to 5. And probation also done a pre-sentencing report for him before trial, and that will have a long comprehensive history. Yeah, there's a lot of people that have sat down before him and asked him a lot of questions. So it's not like these individuals have not built a comprehensive on him. He has been allotted more opportunity during these times to be honest. If he does have problems, then he should have been honest all the way through. Because if he's honest and he deeply is troubled, it doesn't excuse the fact that if he was the one that committed these crimes, it could potentially change the penalty phase. I mean, he could still get the death penalty, but he could get treatment while he was in prison. You know what I mean? It's like to find out what, has he been on meds? Did he stop taking his meds? Did he start self medicating again? All these things are going to play a role into the mens rea or the guilty mind, as I always say, regarding where his mindset was during the time he arrived in Washington, before he arrived in Washington, during his time in Washington, through the murders. Oh, nobody's taking it like that serious. Right. Nobody's taking it like that. Those problems like drug use and head trauma would only be things that lessen his inhibition but wouldn't be the reason for murder. I believe that he becomes fixated really quickly. And when I was listening to Molly, I think it was last night or the night before, when she was talking about her autistic daughter, and she was stating that they're incapable of understanding social cues, most of them, and how her daughter could be making mac and cheese, and if it's not written on the box that, she needs to lower the heat and stir the noodle, then she doesn't know, she's not capable of understanding what the next step is. And that's why the questionnaire was so important to individuals, and that's why they keep going to that. Because that questionnaire, even though it might have been a school project, it still was outlining questions about feeling, that if this individual was incapable of feeling those feelings, then it was giving him a blueprint on what to expect while enduring the murder. So it's like, um, that's why that that questionnaire, DeSalles, was so disturbing to a lot of people. It wasn't disturbing to try to make it that Brian did this. It was disturbing that if somebody's incapable of feeling these things due to whatever they're dealing with psychologically, then it was just a breakdown of understanding. Okay, before I leave my house, I need to take this. But how were you feeling on the way to the place? Well, like I've always said, that was a breakdown of him preparing for the feelings that he should have been feeling that he couldn't. If he does have autism, then he could have went in that house without any feeling whatsoever and killed all these people without understanding the feeling of being able to stop himself, you know? And I don't know enough about autism to really opine on it deeply, other than what she said the other day. And that stood out to me, that her daughter, and about the religious affiliation, that they really don't believe in a religious affiliation, that they are their own higher power, so to speak, because they just rely on themselves. So all that being stated, I mean, it's very probable that this individual did this crime. It's very probable. Not because they needed a patsy, not because they needed a scapegoat. It's just probable based on the evidence on how it points to this individual. The questionnaire disturbed me because it was clearly not for his master's project. It was a few months before graduation. That shows premeditation at obtaining knowledge for his crime. She doesn't have a channel. She just she's just a YouTuber. She doesn't. She doesn't have a channel. She doesn't post anything like that. Um, she's been quite busy with graduation for her twins and stuff like that. So that's why she hasn't been on. But she has a lot of knowledge. But I hope this answers a lot of what you're going to be hearing on these YouTube streets, because people are really going to be pushing the narrative that the defense is going to bring it at trial, and they're going to try to destroy the state. For whatever reason, they made the narrative that it's the defense versus the state, not Brian Koberger versus the state. The defense has nothing to do with innocence or guilt, you know? Brian's the one that's being accused of these murders, and to deflect the fact that everybody and anybody is against Brian is a crappy narrative. It really is. It really is, because Brian Koberger is the suspect in this quadruple homicide. Not the defense, not Ann Taylor, not Massoff, not Bicca Barlow, none of that. Brian is the defendant. So to deflect and put all the pretty much the blame on the defense attorney, as or to focus on the prosecution, you're missing the whole point of the trial. The defendant is sitting in the defendant's chair trying to convince the jury of his peers of his innocence. That's it. Nothing less, nothing more. And to push the narrative that it's a strategical battle, it's not that strategical. Either you have the culpability as an attorney to bring an argument of innocence or guilt toward this defendant, and the jury believes it. That's where we're at today, and that's what it's going to be about. It's not going to be about anything more or less. So individuals are going to hype this up just like a pre-fight hype, and for nothing. It's for nothing but for clicks and views. You know, they're going to destroy those witnesses on the stand. Destroy them from what? It's already on documents what they heard, what they saw, what happened. How are they going to destroy them? They're going to try to destroy their credibility. Okay. I don't think Hitler is going to allow anyone to be destroyed. With as much of a hard ass as he can appear, he seems to be protective over witnesses and possible accusations against anyone. Right. They're not on trial. So why would they be destroyed? All you can cross-examine them or examine them on is the evidence that's presented in the documents. What they heard, what they saw, what they testified to, and what statements they wrote. Everything else that you try to assume or plant the seed of doubt, or, she was a drunk, or she was an addict, or she was this, or she was that, I'm sure that will be overruled, because they aren't on trial. The only place they're on trial is on YouTube. They're not going to be on trial because there's only one suspect on trial, and his name is Brian Koberger. And that's the point blank scenario of this whole thing. But I hope that you've enjoyed this. And I promise I won't be coming on again before work. So you guys go get some rest. And I hope that whatever is keeping you awake dissipates enough that you can get a good night's sleep. And if you're at work, I hope the rest of your night goes well. So, well, even if he is found innocent, Alexei, has he really won anything? I mean, the worst thing that you could ever have is to have to defend yourself in a court of law regarding any kind of law that potentially has been broken, especially in a criminal trial. He'll almost have to change his name in order for him to have any sense of life. His schooling is out the window. He's still going to be faced with all the student loans and everything that he had to repay. Chances are he won't ever get a good job. I mean, so he wins innocent in court. His life is pretty much over unless he regenerates himself in a different avenue. But look at Casey Anthony. She was found innocent, right? And everywhere you look, people are looking for her to mess up. So you're going to be under public scrutiny for the rest of your life, you know? The other day I figured that they wanted to get rid of some FKR stuff. Corey Richards is coming up. Not sure she can get many supporters though. You said something in your live last night that stuck with me. You said that this case is only big on YouTube and really not as big as it seems to be to us where we're hearing about it so much. That's true. It is really true. I mean, I know people that win their cases or even lose their cases, go do their time, have paid their debt to society, but as far as society's concerned, they're guilty for life. So even if he's innocent, this is 2.5 years of his life he'll never get back. And he's not going to sue anybody. For what? He was suspected of a quadruple homicide. Just because you're innocent, who are you going to sue? The state? They did their investigation. That they did what they were supposed to do. You can't sue for monetary value. You can, but chances are you're not going to win. So he's innocent. If he's proven innocent, he's going to start from scratch. Probably move back home with his parents. And God forbid if they get it wrong and he actually is a killer, we'll be hearing about him again. But you know what's so sad is a lot of times these individuals that really are guilty are let out and they go on to kill even more people and more innocent people, children, women that could have been still having a life if people weren't flocking so much for somebody's innocence. You know what I mean? But I'm going to go. Y'all have a wonderful day. It is Friday. For most of you, this is the end of your week. Enjoy yourself this weekend. Try to get some rest. Next week's a short week for some of us. And try not to sweat the small stuff. Maestro, cue that music.